director, Leslie Morris, who was stuck in traffic and will zip in here any moment, so you'll see her. But we would like to have a full opportunity to hear the lecture and answer questions afterwards, so we'll be starting now. A noted scholar of Yiddish language, literature, and culture, Miriam Udel is Associate Professor of German Studies and Jewish Studies at Emory University. She has been a Star Fellow in Judaic Studies at Harvard's Center for Jewish Studies, as well as a Fellow of the Memorial Foundation for Jewish Culture. Her interests include Yiddish modernism and anti-modernism, the rise of the Yiddish novel, the relation between modern and classical Jewish literature, and American Jewish literature. She is the author of Never Better, The Modern Jewish Picaresque, University of Michigan Press, 2016, which won a National Book Award in the category of modern National Jewish Book Award. It's better. It's better. The National Jewish Book Award in the category of modern Jewish thought and experience. We all know where the heart is. Her annotated translated anthology of Yiddish children's literature, Honey on the Page, is slated to appear with New York University Press in fall 2019. Her talk today is entitled Hard Luck Pups, the State, the Family, and Jewish Radicalism Between the Wars. Please welcome Miriam.
So again, my thanks to Leslie, who's not here yet, and to Natan, and to the broader academic and Jewish community here in the Twin Cities. My husband, Adam Zachary Newton, spoke on Friday. Some of you got to hear him. And I got to speak last night, and we've had I said it's been a little colder than we packed for, but warmer reception than anyone could have expected. So it's been a very nice day. I begin by quoting the contemporary American children's author, Jane Yolen, renowned as the author of How Do Dinosaurs Say Goodnight? Maybe among this crowd, a more relevant claim to fame is as the author of How Do Dinosaurs Say Happy Hanukkah? Children know themselves to be the single most powerless unit in today's world. They cannot support themselves, they cannot vote, they have little physical strength, they have but a small knowledge of the universe. They cannot see over walls. As infants, they are entirely dependent upon the kindness of adults, and as they grow up further, they are still small satellites in an adult world. They dream of being big enough and old enough and able enough to tame the wild things. In reality, those wild things could well devour them. Therefore, we give them many tools with which to keep the real world at bay until they are ready for it. We give them teachers, we give them toys, we give them chants and prayers and cultural attitudes, and surround them with tribes and tribal constraints. We give them stories. That is all Yolen. Yolen's psychological aesthetic theory of children's literature, reflecting our own moment perhaps, is built on the assumption of children's essential powerlessness. To her way of thinking, children figure, as the title of an anthology published in 1920 styles them as Kleine in der größer Welt, little ones in the big world. While acknowledging the singular vulnerabilities of children's status, however, I would argue that the rise of Yiddish children's literature about a century ago was predicated on the assumption that children held a great deal of latent but soon to be actualized power in the form of social, cultural, and political capital. With every book they read and every game they played, children were being formed into national subjects and potential vectors of Yiddish cultural transmission. Whether children might best be frightened out of undesirable behaviors or gentled into ideal conduct and seeing it modeled mimetically on the page was still up for debate. But the central importance of the juvenile reader was not. The study of Yiddish children's literature affords a new lens through which to examine the defining crises of the interwar period for Jewry in Eastern Europe and the far-flung Yiddish-speaking diaspora of the Americas. Writing for children necessarily stakes claims on a vision for the future. Surely it is no accident that a vibrant Yiddish literary youth culture arose at a moment of racing ideological ferment when socialism, Soviet communism, and Zionism all appeared as compelling, plausible potentialities for Jewish communal expression and actualization. These movements were the ideological manifestations of such underlying phenomena as secularization, urbanization, mass migration, and the articulation of national identity. At this time, Yiddish cultural leaders emphasized education as a pathway to forming a new kind of Jew, secular, physically fit, roundly educated, and literate in Jewish culture, a Jew liberated from what they considered to be the superstitions and religious pieties of previous generations. Community organizations in Europe and New York allocated hefty resources to establishing an infrastructure of schools in Poland and Russia, and after schools in the Americas, summer camps, and orphanages. These institutions were in turn furnished with books and periodicals published by presses dedicated to promoting particular ideologies. As Naomi Prower-Kadar explains in Raising Secular Jews, Yiddish Schools and Their Periodicals for American Children, 1917 to 1950, socialists, communists, and Zionists each had publications for youth through which they sought to stake a claim on the Jewish future. Nowhere were political tendencies more prominent than in communist fiction for children, where the traditional centrality of the family was reassessed or subverted altogether. Two popular authors of this period, Leib Kvitko and Gershon Einbinder, whose pen name was Chaver Paver, may be viewed as avatars of Soviet and American Yiddish communism, respectively. Kvitko worked in the Soviet Union. Chaver Paver emigrated to Los Angeles, where he became known for his stories about the precocious canine Labzit and the affable socialist family that adopts him. Both authors tended toward realism, in contrast to the romanticizing folkloric predilections of much Yiddish children's literature of the period, the stuff we talked about last night. Both also frankly addressed political themes. But in one key respect, Kvitko and Chaver Paver neatly invert each other. The human and canine members of Chaver Paver's exemplary and conventional father, mother, boy, girl, dog, family experience the world and absorb its lessons through the medium of family, with its hierarchical but cooperative gender and generational power dynamics. His stories cast the family as a microcosm of a cheerfully functioning democratic country. While the characters' values and aims are communist, their methods are democratic. Many communist countries also aspired to be fully realized democracies. Kvitko, on the other hand, like many of his compatriots, sketches portraits of children with absent or incompetent parents. They must overcome this deficiency by falling back on their own internal resources as well as those of the Soviet state, the ultimate dispenser of care and guidance. When I began working with this material, I expected to be able to clearly differentiate between the communism of Kvitko and the socialism of Einbinder, whom I expected to be a bit softer and less pointed in his call for a disruption of the reigning capitalist order. What I found, however, is a tonal contrast rather than a sharp ideological one. Despite similar politics and authorial attitudes, the Lebenslage simply unfolded differently in 1930s New York than in 1930s Moscow or Kharkov. Taking advantage of the prophecy of hindsight, we might hazard the inference that the tonal disparities between these two authors foreshadow the difference between death by firing squad on the night of the murdered poets and death from natural causes in Los Angeles in the mid-1960s. Lev Kvitko was among the most prolific Yiddish children's authors in the Soviet Union, and his work was surely the most widely disseminated. Born in 1890 or 1893, it's a little unclear, in Holoskova near Odessa, he lost both of his parents at a young age and was raised by his grandmother. He seems to have retained some warm feelings for his hometown, as he dedicated the 1927 verse story Berchik to the Holoskover Shul. Despite, or perhaps because of a working-class childhood, he harbored literary aspirations that were dampened, but not squelched, by the rejection of his early poetry by the critic Shmuel Niger, or as contemporary American critics like to call him, Shmuel Charny. He was encouraged to persevere by David Bergelson, who also arranged a sort of GED for him, private lessons in general subjects and languages. In 1917, Kvitko arrived in Kiev wearing a homemade coat, hat, and boots, and was welcomed by the urban literary community as a folk teller. He married in 1918 and settled in Kiev, where he worked as a courier and later as a teacher at a Jewish orphanage. Following his book Lidalech, Poems for Little Children, in 1917, 3 more collections of his children's poems were published in Kiev between 1918 and 1920. Meanwhile, Kvitko became part of the Kulturliga literary circle and published modernist and folk poetry. During the early 20s, he spent time living in Kovno, Berlin, and Hamburg, while his poems appeared in periodicals based in Berlin, Moscow, and New York. Having joined the Communist Party in Germany, Kvitko hurried back to Soviet Russia in 1925, fearing that the German police would arrest him for his political activities. He was offered the editorship of a journal in Kharkov and was championed as a children's author by the leading Russian children's writer Kornei Chaikovsky, whose support helped to ensure that his works in Russian and Ukrainian translation would enjoy print runs in the millions. Kvitko is covered with official honors throughout the 30s, but none of his acclaim could ultimately prevent his liquidation at Stalin's behest, along with other members of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee on August 12, 1952. Needless to say, the Stalin who ordered the murder of Jewish poets, novelists, and activists would have been unrecognizable to the author of the 1940 picture book, Vemesizis Meidele, Whose Little Girl Is This? Published in Moscow by Melucha Farlag at Emes, the story had a print run of 10,000, one of Kvitko's largest print runs in Yiddish. He wrote mostly in verse, but this is one of a few works where he alternates between rhyming verse and prose. A rhyming frontispiece describes the Meidele and Employum Kleidele, the little girl in the blue dress who is ready to chase butterflies in a country orchard. The prose explains that she is transfixed by the crowds of Dasha-bound mothers and children in the train station, and in the commotion becomes separated from her own mother, who mistakes another little girl for hers and hustles her onto the carriage by the shoulders, leaving her own daughter behind. At first, the abandoned girl is so paralyzed with fear that she can neither move nor speak, despite the best efforts of the passers-by to identify and care for her. She grows increasingly upset until she's on the verge of tears, longing for a familiar face. Just then, she spots one. Ot is do an eigener, ihr alter guter Freund. Hat so gut ungericht var ihrer Doder scheint. Here was one of her own, a friend of many years, so very unexpectedly before her he appears. The onlookers follow her joyful gaze to the portrait of Stalin, hanging between 2 windows in the station, toward which the girl now makes her way. She has located a paternal presence to substitute for the missing maternal one. Having taken courage from the reassuringly familiar face, she at last is ready to address the gathered crowd, which she does with confidence and precocity. Maya Volokove, drei Jahre das Vierte, Kirovgas 78, Quartier 9. So she gives her name and her age and her address. She charms the onlookers, all of whom rush to aid and engage her in various ways. Und das Mädel ist so lacht und das Mädel ist scheint, leben größen Kinderfreund. The little girl lit up with laughter, had nary a care, by the great friend of children everywhere. Just at this happy climax, Maya's mother comes back to claim her. Parenthetically, I'll add, there is no mention of what happened to the child her mother took by accident. Other Kvitko books and poems praise Soviet heroes. Lenin is the referent of the paraphrastic title Der schönste Nomen, the most beautiful name, while the narrator protagonist of As ich soll aufwachsen wishes to join Semyon Budyonny's Red Cavalry when he grows up. But published in the relatively late year of 1940 and unique in its celebration of a still-living political leader, Vemes's Meidle seems to be the author's fawning attempt to curry favor or to protect himself from the wrathful, real-life discipline of the benignantly imagined Papa Stalin, who is depicted cultically as having a special relationship with the children of the USSR. After all, the dominant emotions depicted in this book are fear and relief, a familiar enough landscape from fairy tales, but an unsettling palette in a book so mimetically drawn as this one. Let's consider a story of youthful aspiration and untrammeled romantic yearning now. The year of the Odessa publication of Ach, as ich will auswachsen is unknown, but I suspect that from the print run of just 3,000, the story was likely published relatively early in Kvitko's career. Given its reference to the Little Octobrists youth group, it must have appeared in 1924 or later, when the group was founded. Narrated in charming verse by a dreamy young boy, the story comprises 3 parts. First, a frankly admiring celebration of the beauty of the Red Army's nearby loshikis, or foals, and an encomium to the mustachioed stable hands who care for them. Then, a recounting of his 4 older siblings' various occupations, and finally, an imaginary exchange with Marshal Budyonny about his own fitness for the cavalry. The first section is downright lyrical, with the boy admiring the most minute details of the horse's physiques and movements. Jene loshikes mit die starke Zähne, bei die hohe Korites in die stahlen Reine. Jene loshikes mit die edle Glieder, stellt sich nur a Flieg auf sie, tut die Häute zittern. Oh, those fools with strong white teeth that gleam, over by the carriages in their stalls so clean. Oh, those fools with limbs so very gentle, still scared of flies or anything that's quick and accidental. As much as the narrator admires the horses themselves, he admires their handlers, the konyuches, or stable hands, for their tenderness, their freedom, and their fearlessness. The horses' handlers embody every trait that typifies the Cossacks in Isaac Babel's Red Cavalry stories, except, of course, for the hardened soldiers' trademark venality and brutality, which have been replaced here by Zärtlichkeit, tenderness. After describing how fearlessly the grooms move among the horses, the narrator muses on his aspirations to follow his 4 older brothers and sisters into adulthood, but via a novel occupational pathway. His eldest sister is a pilot or a parachutist, a Flierin. The illustration shows her in a parachute over here on the left. The next brother is a poet. The sister after that is a weaver. She is shown threading a large mechanical loom. The fourth child, a brother, is still in school. But as for the narrator, he proclaims, Ich, der Samme Fünfster, ich will sein bei Pferdlach. I'm the fifth one of all, and I want to work with horses. The poem continues with the boy's imagined conversation with his beloved Konyachus once he's old enough to wear long pants. I can't help but notice the narrator's vigor and high spirits. Azai yata freiliche, wo bist gewachsen mit derselchen Muskeln, mit derselchen Achsel? Bist du von die Oktoberloch? Bist von die Pionerie? Nimm je sich affair bei uns und vor in Kavallerie. Such a jolly lad as you leaves us almost awed. Your muscles look to be quite strong and your shoulders broad. Were you a little Octoberist? Were you in the youth pioneers? Come on and take a horse with us and join the Cavaliers. Now, to anyone who has read Babel's Red Cavalry stories, this passage sounds so comically improbable as to be almost tragic. The Jew, immortalized with glasses on his nose and winter in his heart, riding among Cossacks, was meant to be an oxymoron, the very definition of tante de sacre, two things that conflict. But in children's literature, it need not be so. Kvitko can create a child protagonist with the impeccable communist youth culture credentials, one who has self-evidently risen through the ranks of the junior youth group, the Little Octobrists, and then its division for middle grade children, the youth pioneers, presumably on his way to the Komsomol, and then the Red Army itself. There need be no more tension between Jewish and Soviet identity. Indeed, the only discernibly Jewish thing about the narrator is the fact that he addresses us in Yiddish. There is very little Lashon Kodesh, or language of Hebrew derivation, in Kvitko's Yiddish. In fact, in this story's 21 stanzas, the only Hebraic words are moirahodin, to be afraid, and mesukim, dangerous. The poem ends with an imagined meeting with the great Marshal Budyoni himself, who avers that if the boy studies hard, he'll be on course to join the cavalry. Through its mention of siblings, this story furnishes its speaker with more of a family than most other works by Kvitko, but it is the youthful generation that matters. There is no mention of parental nurture or instruction as fostering the children's varied occupational pathways. Marshal Budyoni is overwhelming. Marshal, but he is all the father that the boy needs. Even in a story so diegetic that the characters are animals, Kvitko embeds a clueless parent and a family that can be saved only through the clever initiative of the children. The family unit is strong enough at the beginning of Atzig mit sieben Zigelech, a nanny goat with 7 kids. Once upon a time, in a clearing in the wood, lived a billy goat and a nanny goat with all that was good. Their home was happy, its own little heaven. And as for kids, they had 7. 6 of their kitties were healthy, athletic, but the 7th one was truly pathetic. But even the physically weak kid has compensatory strengths. His ribs poked out like needles, and what's more, he limped on 1 foot. But where he could be, he was the best, more clever and cheerful than all the rest. In short order, though, a nanny goat is widowed and must leave her children to forage for food. She leaves her latchkey kids with a strict admonition to open the door only for her, and they begin to look forward to the sing-song she belts out upon returning each day. But a bear is lurking nearby, and he quickly masters the song. The first time the bear tries to pass himself off as their mother, the clever but lame kid prevails on his siblings not to open up for the hoarse, presumably masculine voice that sings to them. The second time, however, the ursine predator has disguised his voice, and the kids are tired anyway of listening to their scolding, know-it-all brother. Once they admit the bear, he scoops up 6 of the 7 kids and promises to return and snatch the 7th, the cripple. The lame kid follows at a safe distance and discerns the location of the lair. When his mother returns home, she's devastated at the loss of her kids. Her young son entreats her to stop crying and instead lay a trap for the bear. By doing so, she's able to rescue her other children. The parent provides the muscle, but the wise child provides the brains to save the day. Consider one more story in which the parents are conspicuously absent and agents of the state act in their place. Boots und die Sanitaren, Boots and the Bath Squad, is a surreal yet somehow charming story about a gluttonous boy who refuses to bathe. His Jewish identity is marked only by the fact that he lives in the shtetl and perhaps by the backwardness of his ethnically marked gluttony and filth. We hear about his unrestrained love of his favorite sweets, and then onto the scene burst a detachment of 3 sanitaren, sanitation agents, or as I've translated it, bathmen, who are tasked with forcibly bathing the recalcitrant youth. Their mandate seems to stem from the combination of germ theory with a muted but unmistakable dirt libel against the Jews. Tut sanitar azing via trometo, der Kater geht in Städtel, as a jung, as a schlung, as a brud, as a schmutz, nehmt dem Putz, schleppt ihm in Wanne, lost auf ihm up die Krake. The bathmen sang out shrill as a trumpet's metal, a cold is going round the shtetl. What a punk, what a craw, such filthy funk, his dirty maw. Grab that Boots, that grubby schlub, drag him over to the tub, turn on the taps, no time to gossip. Hurry, get him to that faucet. His henchmen are intimidating, preternaturally elongated figures in the illustrations by Boris Friedkin, and they swiftly set about extirpating the filth that seems to come of being a gluttonous, shtetl-dwelling Jewish boy. Although the forcible bathing is by turns traumatic and comical, Boots's socks are so caked onto Boots's socks are so caked onto his feet that they cannot be removed before the bath, but must instead be left to float to the surface. The boy eventually comes to appreciate it, and you have the socks here floating on the surface all the way on the right. The boy eventually comes to appreciate his new state of cleanliness. Once clean and dry, he manfully shakes the hand of his smock-clad oppressor. When they took him from the bath, he beamed with pride, began to laugh. He didn't recognize himself sitting on a chair so grand. He reached to shake the bathman's hand. Absent parental interference, the state effects a transformation of the dirty little Jew so thorough as to render him unrecognizable to himself. If you want to see more of Boris Friedkin's sinuous lines, you can check out this postcard and poster from the World Festival of Youth from 1957, and this lovely illustration that he did for one of Kornei Shukovsky's children's books, his Dr. Dolittle. Now we pass from Soviet cleanliness to the more familiar squalor of the New York subway system, and in so doing, from the USSR to the US of A, to imagine some of the Leipzig stories authored by Gershon Einbinder, better known as Chaver Paver. A native of Bershad, Bessarabia, he emigrated to this country in 1924 at the age of 23. He worked as a teacher in the Yiddish schools and contributed regularly to the newspaper Die Freiheit. He lived in the bustling New York and printed on these stories before moving to Los Angeles, where he wrote a bit for Hollywood, a film based on Mendel's Fischke the Lame, and another called The Jester, as well as continuing to write for adults and children in Yiddish. The only work of his to be translated into English thus far is his collection of short stories, Clinton Street. That is about to change because this year, meaning 2019, I have a translation fellowship from the Yiddish Book Center to translate the Leipzig stories and eventually the sequel, the Vovik stories. Leipzig, published in 1935, was distributed through the Yiddish shulas of the International Workers' Order, the most communist aligned of the 4 secular Yiddish school systems then functioning in New York, and its proletarian sympathies are vividly clear. By the way, Leipzig possesses the additional advantage of being illustrated with the confident and economical line of Lubunin. If you don't know his work, including his psychedelic animation of Alice in Wonderland, it's more than worth it to Google it, to Google it after the talk. When we meet Leipzig, he's cowering on the platform of an elevated train station in the Bronx, where he's been abandoned by a well-meaning but impoverished owner who explains that she has even had to send her own daughter to live with relatives in Boston due to her husband's unemployment. The puppy's whimpering attracts the attention of kindly Beryl the operator, Beryl the operator, or sewing machine operator, who decides to take a chance and delight his son Mulik and daughter Rivka with the gift of a dog. The family is sketched rapidly in stereotypes. Beryl is gruff, but has reassuringly merry black eyes. He punctuates his speech with the mild curse "akapore," which seems alternately to signify, "Oh, blast it," or "golly, what's the use," or "gosh darn." His wife Molly is forbearing and cheerful. She manages the household, coming to terms with their boarder and holding the family to standards of decent behavior, like making Beryl greet her and the children properly on the night when he is sulkingly preoccupied by an impending strike. Rivkele is all sweetness and affection and mimetic nurture, especially where it concerns Leipzig, whom she cuddles like a baby doll and gently chastises when he does some bit of harmless mischief. Mulik is brave and decent, selflessly leading a strike on behalf of his hungry schoolmates, who are ethnic Polish Americans. He is also close friends with Noach, the only black boy on the block. Taken together, they seem like a sitcom family, and maybe, had their comic tribulations taken place 2 decades later, and in the English language, they might have been. I eventually would like to see Leipzig as an animation. With the stories structured episodically, you can almost hear the laugh track punctuating Leipzig's antics. The action rises to a conflict in each chapter and is resolved by chapter's end, often through the interference or intervention of Leipzig, despite his limited repertoire of activities and expressions. Even so, the themes are anything but lighthearted. Indeed, Einbinder manifests political commitments similar to Kripke's. Let's talk about a few seminal episodes. Recent events have foregrounded those involving relations with police and interracial friendships, both of which are prominently portrayed in the Leipzig stories. The family inhabits a milieu thick with leftist youth culture. The children attend public school each morning, and then a secular Yiddish shula in the afternoon where the Internationale is sung and various political causes are highlighted. Brother and sister head to the intersection near the train station one afternoon to collect funds for the benefit of Ernst Thälmann, the Weimar-era leader of the German Communist Party, who was held in solitary confinement for 11 years before being executed in Buchenwald. Indeed, the main youth group in East Germany after World War II was known as the Thälmann Pioneers. policeman tries to arrest Mulik, Rivkala, and Labzik, but as he holds the kicking, struggling kids and dog by their collars in this picture, a crowd of workers gathers and demands to know what's going on. After being told that it's none of their business, the workers reply, "Sie ist ja unser Geschäft. Was hast du zu die kleinen Kinder? Und was bringst du in Beuchereien dem schönen Hinterle? Ruft sich an Mulik, schleppt uns in Turme, weil wir sammeln Geld zu Rativen Telmanen, weil der Policeman ist für die Reiche. Telman machen die Arbeiter unser Chaber Telmanen. Ey, du paskudner Kap. Ey, du a Zäuner. Yes, it is our business. What have you got against these little kids? And why are you kicking this nice doggy in the stomach?" Mulik called out, "He's taking us to jail because we're collecting money to save Telman, because the policeman's on the side of the rich." "Telman," says the worker. "Our friend Telman? Oh, you lousy cop, you little such and such." Telman is not the only foreign communist hero to whom Beryl and Molly's children feel an allegiance. Mulik proudly surprises Rivka and Lapsik with a new poster, a portrait of Lenin. The children decide to fix up a Leninwinkel in their room, a Lenin corner. According to Elissa Bemporad's rich and engagingly written study of Minsk becoming Soviet Jews, the Young Pioneers Handbook stated that every pioneer would set up an atheist corner at home with anti-religious pictures, poems, and sayings as a counterpoint to the Russian Orthodox tradition of maintaining in-home icon corners. Generally, the way the stories work is that Lapsik engages in some minor act of mischief, either with or without the initial approbation of his family. When Mulik organizes a children's strike to demand meals for all the children and subsidized meals for those who need them, Lapsik delivers contraband pamphlets. He's threatened with arrest until the children ring the animal control wagon and stage a sit-in, allowing the dog to escape. And there they are around the animal control wagon. The children's strike is but a pale imitation of the real thing, recounted in what is perhaps the book's darkest chapter. Beryl's boss extends the workday to 9 p.m., prompting the workers to strike. But there are 8 holdouts in the shop on 34th Street. Beryl climbs up 18 flights to persuade the holdouts to join the strike. The bosses have him jumped by goons, identified in the text as gangsters, tied up and thrown behind a locked door on the roof of the building. Lapsik, who has snuck along for the adventure against the wishes of the family, finds Beryl and summons help. The strike prevails. In addition to his pure charm value, the canine protagonist allows Einbinder to have it both ways. On one hand, Lapsik displays preternatural intelligence, but on the other, a dog is just a dog, unintelligent, unenlightened, and literally inhuman when it comes to the scourge of racism. Lapsik, following some mysterious instinct, bites Mulik's friend Noyach on the leg, only to have Mulik punish him with 10 lashes, because he and all of the children understand this immediately as a hate crime. But there's a worse punishment in store for him. Ever ready to imitate the adults, Mulik and his friend Jaime, who calls Lapsik a weißer chauvinist, or racist in the parlance of the day, convene a trial before all the other kids from the block. They determine that Lapsik must be ostracized for a full week for this hate crime. This is so hard on the social animal that after a few days, we have omniscient access to his thoughts, and we know that after a few days, Lapsik will prefer drowning in a river. But when the week is up, Lapsik has learned his lesson. He wouldn't bite a black child who'd done nothing to him, even for a whole house full of lamb chops. And as Einbinder has designed it, the Yiddish-speaking children from the block as they grow into their latent social power, have learned their lesson too. Politically progressive, racially enlightened, these are the values that Einbinder puts forward as both Jewish and American values seamlessly joined. And the place where those values are both modeled and discussed is the home of the Jewish worker. The functional, involved family provides the site where identity is formed. In his books, Kvitko needed the parents out of the way so that the state could be shown to nurture its youngest citizens directly, to transform them from dirty Jews into clean Soviet citizens. In story after story, the nuclear family is temporarily compromised or permanently dismantled to create space for a nationalized parental presence. Papa Stalin figures as the only father who can give effective care, and thus as the only parent who ultimately matters. The loss or vitiation of parents goes unremarked, or is even celebrated rather than mourned. In contrasting American fashion, Beryl and Molly's functional, involved family provides the fertile soil where their children's political identity is cultivated. Brother and sister learn by imitating their parents' politics. The family's sympathies and habits are bound up in their Jewishness, their Yiddishkeit, but not constrained by it. Communism is just as much their religion as Judaism. And, like a traditional religion, the gentle American version of this political faith guides them to seek justice and pursue ways of kindness. The family overcomes any internal dissension to present a united front to the world, unambivalent in their stance against racism and poverty, resolute in their disdain for the bourgeoisie. While the Leipzig stories focus tightly on the portrait of a single family, it is meant to be a broadly representative one, with all members acting as a nation might on high-minded commitments and robust democratic norms for the betterment of humanity. Thank you. Fragen, questions, comments, curiosity?
How were the Yiddish books in the Soviet Union distributed? You've mentioned a huge
Huge print run. A print run of 10 million. And I read that and I said, no way. The person who's done the most research on Kvitko is Gennady Estreich at NYU. Gennady, 10 million? And he said, oh yeah. After Tchaikovsky got involved, 10 million. So, in part through Jewish schools, but also through the library system, because the Soviet state invested very, very heavily in children's libraries. Lenin's wife was a children's librarian, and so they really had the ear of the higher-ups in creating these really powerful and kind of omnipresent libraries that really pushed books.
But wouldn't the state want to quench the Jewish Yiddish publication?
Not in the 20s, not until later in the Stalinist project. There was a really active state interest in promoting Yiddish culture, because the thing that had to be quelled and suppressed was Hebrew. And Hebrew is the language of the religion and of superstition, and Yiddish was going to point the way forward. And the way that we see this really clearly is in the promulgation of a distinctively Soviet orthography. I'm trying to see if I have a quick example here. So, you don't even, yeah, you do see it a little bit. So if you look at the word ich, normally ich would have a final chaf at the end of it. So the Soviet Yiddish powers that be promulgated a new style of orthography that suppressed all of the irrational markers of the Hebrew heritage of Yiddish, all of the final forms of letters, and it rationalized any Hebraic words. It rationalized the spelling of them in order to remove the kind of irrational features where you really had to know the Hebrew in order to read the Yiddish correctly. That was all expunged, and editions were printed of everything you can imagine that had this streamlined Soviet orthography. So there was a really lively, project of promulgating Soviet Yiddish. That shifts in the late 30s.
One more question,
Yeah,
then I'll
sure.
shut up. So there were a lot of Russian Jews who did not write in Yiddish, like Yevgeny Schwartz and
Yeah.
people like that.
Sure.
Was there any interaction between the writers who chose to, do their plays or novels
Definitely,
in Russian?
definitely.
Yeah.
And there were figures who wrote in both languages, and there was a very active translation scene in both directions between the languages. So, the friendship and collaboration between Tchaikovsky and Kvitko is really emblematic, because Kvitko was known as Lev. So we think of him as Lev Kvitko. He's known in Russian as Lev Kvitko, and he has these extraordinary print runs in Russian translation. A lot of back and forth. Yeah.
Just building on top of that, and my knowledge of Yiddish studies is very limited, but I know that there is a big discrepancy between those who can speak Yiddish and those who can read Yiddish. And I'm wondering, due to that, who were these books trying to be the audience for? Because it was a socioeconomic difference, if I remember correctly, in terms of who could read it and who could speak it.
Between, I don't know. I don't think that was such a factor at that time. And there was certainly a discrepancy between those who could access Hebrew, which was an elite language, and those who could access Yiddish. But I think, it was, broadly speaking, it was mamamush. It was a mother tongue, and there was a very high rate of literacy in the Jewish community in Yiddish. So really,
For reading it, though?
for reading, yeah, I think so. I haven't read anything to the contrary.
I mean, in the early modern period, that's different. When
In the
we're talking
early
about
modern period, before we
17th,
have
18th
such
century, then there's-
widespread literacy, but really from, the mid-19th century on, we're talking about very broad.
So it was really written for the masses.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well,
I'm wondering if you could speak generally about this anthology project, which I'm really interested in,
Sure.
having just come off the heels of my own anthology project. I'm wondering what are the boundaries? What did you put in? How did you make decisions? What to leave out? How to frame?
a fellow anthologist who recognizes the work of selection is by far the most overwhelming part of it, even more so than the translation, perhaps. So, it could have been the never-ending. So yes, selection principles. With very few exceptions, I tried to stick to books that had originated in Yiddish rather than translations into Yiddish. I did include one verse translation because I felt like it was so clever and it was so much a new text by virtue of the rhyming verse translation that I could live with that. I tried to organize the book in a way that I saw many anthologies and chrestomathies, which are readers with didactic intent, the way that I saw them organized, which was, broadly speaking, a movement from the more particularistic to the more broadly universal. So the book starts with Jewish holidays, Jewish history, and Jewish heroes, the three H's, and then it moves to more universal, less religiously or ethnically marked works, and it's thematically organized. So we have stories and poetry about nature, about school and other scenes of instruction, sort of wisdom and comic wisdom literature, all of the kind, and folklore, things that you would find in many different cultures. And that's the sort of organizational mode of the book. And then my other desideratum was to really try to recover some women's voices that have mostly been lost. And I could not achieve parity. So of the 27 authors that I have represented, 8 are women, and that was with some effort. And the way that I tried to create a balance there was when I thought that there was, aesthetic merit to justify it, to include longer selections by women. So one of the unknown treasures, I think, of the Yiddish 20th century, who I hope will become better known, is a figure named Zina Rabinovich, who was born in Poland and ended up in Latin America, published a lot in Buenos Aires. I believe that she lived at least part of her life in Uruguay, and she has a wonderful cycle of stories pegged to the Jewish holidays, many of which are set in various parts of the Sephardic world. She has a story set in Morocco, she has a story set in Trinidad.
But in Yiddish.
In Yiddish.
Amazing.
In Yiddish, it's amazing. So she has the holiday tales, I include a couple of those, and then she has this fantastic multi-generational saga stretching from the 1850s all the way to immediate post-World War II, 4 generations of fathers and sons in this one German Jewish family called The Story of a Stick. It's a very Zionist story. It has a very ideological story arc, but it's really beautifully done. So I included it. I would say even though it's long, and my publisher would say even though it's long, I say because it was long and really showcased this great writer. Leslie?
Yeah, so I keep thinking about the story about the dirty little boy and the images as well, illustrators. So I'm just wondering if were there illustrators then who moved between illustrating for the Yiddish world and for the non-Yiddish world, and did that encounter then create, is that another way to think about, who was visually?
Oh my gosh. So, I'm trying to acquire the skills to talk about the visuals because I haven't been trained in it, but you can't talk about these stories without it, which is, why I made this PowerPoint. So this Boris Friedkin, I think, is a genius, and here we see him doing work for, the general Soviet project, and for this Russian story by Kornei Shulkovsky. Somebody like that moved back and forth, and then